Where do we go about tax cuts?
We can talk about it at the next event.
Different elements seem to support this theory.
Emma Booker, elementary school.
First of all, the fact that the Secret Service, who are in charge of the president's safety, allowed Bush to remain in the school for over half an hour after the second tower in New York had been hit.
The second plane is in the second tower.
At that point, the president had clearly become a possible target, and the duty of the Secret Service was to remove him immediately from a place where everybody knew he was at the time.
He was made aware that the first jetliner was struck.
However, no one seems to have worried about his safety, nor about the children at the school, or the school's personnel around him. It was as if someone within the Secret Service knew that the school was not going to be a target.
May God bless the victims, their families.
Furthermore, when Bush tried to get back to Washington, the White House gave warning that Air Force One was the next target, forcing the pilot of the presidential plane to a hurried, spectacular takeoff.
This is Air Force One departing Sarasota, Florida. Yes, it's 907.
The journalists traveling with the president later commented, "It was like a rocket. For a good 10 minutes, it kept climbing almost vertically."
This is Ann Compton with a pool report. I am with the president.
As Bush was frantically trying to communicate with Dick Cheney, the lines with the White House kept cutting off. Frustrated, the president pounded on his desk, shouting, "This is inexcusable. Get me the vice president." After a stop in Louisiana, Air Force One landed in a military base in Nebraska. From here, the president and his staff were transferred to an underground bunker, where they remained locked up for the rest of the afternoon. After these multiple detours, President Bush was able to return to Washington only in the evening, when all the major decisions had already been made. It was later found that the threats to Air Force One never existed. Thus begins to form a picture of a president unaware of the facts, and somehow held hostage by the neocons who were effectively in charge throughout the whole day. At the White House was Vice President Cheney. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, and next to him his deputy, Paul Wolfowitz.
It is a shell game.
This is what Michael Ledeen, one of the most influential neoconservatives, had to say about the presidency of George W. Bush.
All right, so he became president, but he didn't know why. And on September 11th, he discovered why.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. I have a message for our military. Be ready.
But who are the neocons? The neoconservative school of thought can be traced to the University of Chicago's Professor Leo Strauss, who began enunciating its principles by the end of the 60s.
It's sort of a happy happening for hippies.
It was the time of the flower children, of the civil rights battles, of sexual liberation and individual freedom, which had reached levels never imagined before. All of this, however, for Strauss, represented only the seed of a rapid and disastrous decadence for the entire American nation. According to his thinking, individual freedom leads to personal conflicts, which undermine the nation's potential for growth and success. What Strauss envisioned was a compact, uniform society held together by a universal glue that would allow each individual to pour their personal ambitions into a collective movement, all directed toward the outside. The only way to obtain this was to face the population with a large, dark enemy, whose existence would threaten the survival of the American nation. Among Strauss's most enthusiastic followers was a young Paul Wolfowitz. The idea of creating an evil enemy to bring together a whole nation was certainly not new. From Nero to Hitler, history is filled with examples in which this strategy was used with great success. The novelty introduced by the neocons, however, was that for the first time in history, the adversary would be the entire world. The main obstacle for the neocons was represented by Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, who pursued with foreign countries a policy of détente based on solid bilateral agreements. But when Nixon was forced to resign due to the Watergate scandal, the neocons were able to place next to the new president, Gerald Ford, a Secretary of Defense who would find himself in the same position some 30 years later, Donald Rumsfeld. Another neocon who was able to take advantage of the situation was Dick Cheney, who became Chief of Staff for the new president. Thus, the White House started to become a familiar territory for these men, who envisioned a strong America that imposed its rule to the rest of the world and led the other nations in the eternal fight of good versus evil. In spite of some relatively quiet times with Russia, it was in fact Donald Rumsfeld who kept trying to enlarge the appearance of an enemy that history itself would later reveal as totally non-existent.
The Soviet Union has been busy. They've been busy in terms of their level of effort. They've been busy in terms of the actual weapons that they've been producing. They've been busy in terms of expanding production rates. They've been busy in terms of expanding their institutional capability to produce additional weapons at additional rates. They've been busy in terms of expanding their capability to increasingly improve the sophistication of those weapons. Year after year after year, they've been demonstrating that they have steadiness of purpose, that they're purposeful about what they're doing.
Since none of this, however, was reflected by the current intelligence, Rumsfeld managed to convince President Ford to create an independent group to re-examine all the information that the CIA had gathered about the Russians from the beginning. The group was called Team B, and it was put under the direction of the neoconservative Richard Pipes, who took under his wing a young and enthusiastic Paul Wolfowitz. Team B's true purpose was to manipulate the CIA's original intelligence with the intent of presenting the Soviet Union as a truly evil nation, equipped with the most powerful secret technology, whose only intent was to annihilate the United States. Naturally, by the end of their task, Pipes and Wolfowitz presented a report containing a truly terrifying image of the Soviet Empire. It was, however, a false image, born of the projection of their own need for a powerful enemy towards which to direct the precious energies of the nation that were being absorbed by a moral relativism that they deemed unacceptable. The new Carter presidency imposed a temporary setback in their path to world domination. The need to quickly reconquer the White House led the neocons to seek an alliance in a totally uncharted territory, the religious one, which accounted for a large amount of potential new votes. Traditionally, the leaders of the different Protestant denominations had kept their flocks away from politics, a world they considered immoral and corrupt. But the fear of falling under communist rule, which would have also brought atheism along, was apparently sufficient to provide the basis for a historic alliance that has lasted ever since.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America. We must do it.
Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election by a landslide. And at that point, the neocons felt they had the right to claim some important positions in the new administration. Paul Wolfowitz became the head of external relations for the White House, while a friend of his from the times of Strauss, Richard Pearl, was appointed Deputy Secretary of Defense. But the great enemy they were seeking was in the meantime collapsing under the weight of internal divisions and corruption.